Okay, well, hello everybody, and welcome to RoxAnneLava's Monday Mission. I'm so glad to be able to bring this to you today. I have an interesting project. As you know, one of the things that I'm doing here is I am a solopreneur and I am a shoemaker. And so each week, what I do with my Monday Mission is I show you what I'm working on during the week. And so if you've been following me from the get-go, we started just talking about shoes and lasts. And then I started talking about a pair of luxury slippers that I'm making. After that, we talked about the first Monday of the month, and many of the marketing things that I need to take care of as a solopreneur. And because it was February 1st and it was the first day of the month and it was a Monday, I did things like my newsletter. I showed you and talked about a bunch of marketing plans that I had and how I use things. And then last week we talked about ideas and inspiration. And I have made some progress on that. If you've seen it, if you've been following me on my Instagram during the week, what I do is I update my Monday Mission, and I've found some inspiration and I've found some ideas to include, and I've been working on developing that project. But here's what I really wanted to talk about today. I'm just going to show you a couple things up close before I start to go into the making. So if you were following me about my luxury slippers, okay, these are the luxury slippers that I was making. I was doing a prototype, and this is my prototype. And if you were following along with me, you would remember that I had some toe trouble with one of my slippers. And so this is the slipper that had the toe trouble. And I think what you can see here is, do you see how the leather is kind of bubbling here? And it's creating kind of not a smooth toe on this particular one. Whereas on this one, even though there's a little bubbling, I got a better toe here. But I wanted to just show you that when I was doing it with very flexible upcycled sweaters, it was far easier for me to get a non-bubbled toe. This is not bubble that you're seeing here. This is just some excess glue. Now, the reason is, as you remember, I was using this particular last as my guide for the upper. And of course, when you have something super stretchy, as you can see, it's much easier than when you have something not so stretchy. And so one of the reasons that I think I need to resolve this is that the upper pattern that I've been using for my slippers does not actually match this last. So the idea is to make a pattern upper for this last that will actually fit this last, and then I can size it up for larger shoes, because remember, this is a 7.5 last, and what you might remember is that every shoe is built around a last of the size that you need. So I'll be able to beef this up to get a bigger upper and a bigger form, but what I can't do is have a wrong shape for this toe box, and that's what we call this. We call this the toe box. So today I thought what I'm going to do is show you how to make that pattern. So I'm going to put you up higher. I'm going to make sure that I'm in my space, and I'm going to start to show you what I've done. Okay, so these slippers, as you will recall, are couples slippers. And so there is one for the man. And I have a regular size 12 here, but it's a rounded toe last that I'm going to be using for those slippers for the men. And I am using the size 7.5. This is the one that I always use for my women's slippers. So this is the one that I actually need to get right. Hey, Neil, how are you? Nice to see you. So what I'm doing here is I wanted to show you how we actually create a pattern. And I wanted to tell you a couple of things about the pattern with the last and the bottom of the shoe and the upper of the shoe. So the first thing that I want to tell you is that the way that we actually create a last is that we add masking tape to the last. And I only need to do it for my upper, so I've only done it around the top. Now on this shoe, on this last, I've also done the bottom, and I'm going to tell you why in just a few seconds. But it's hard to see that masking tape on the white on white. So here I wanted to show you with a green last. I think you can see that the upper has been taped pretty nicely. And you can also see that my bottom has not been taped here. Now, the important thing that I want you to know is there are 3 layers of masking tape on the last. And what we do is we start with either a long view, which is what you can see here, I hope, right? So I took the tape from the top all the way down to the toe. I did that on the sides and this side. That was the first layer. The second layer went across this way, and I'm going to show you again on my other last so you can just see it. Okay, and then my third layer came back in what I'm going to call the long direction. So it went long all the way through, short all the way through, and then long all the way through. So we have 3 layers of masking tape on this last. And it's important to have the 3 layers because you need something very sturdy to make the pattern. Okay, so here I think you might be able to see that I had done a long group first, and I'm working on a short over group. Now I left this side here on my second layer just so I can show you how I do it. Now, there's a lot of ways for people to think about doing this. I'm just going to move my camera down a little bit so you can see what's going on my table. All right. But what the biggest thing is that you can do it either. I find it satisfying to just use my tape and to break each one. So what I end up doing is, and again, I'm going across the front here. I do need to turn it because I just kind of need to show it. So I think I'm going to try and show it this way. I need to come down this side here. And so the way that I do that, and I like to overlap, I like to do one side at a time. You do need to overlap the piece in front because the idea is we're trying to make something nice and solid. Okay. I like to roll my last and then rip. Okay, so now you can see, I hope, that I've put another piece on, and here's where it gets good because you get to mold it down nice and tight. If you have something like a burnishing bone, it's great because you can get it really nice and tight. And I really do love, like this, I find very soothing. I find masking a last is one of the most kind of soothing things in the world to do. It's kind of like knitting for me. So this is a bone burnisher. And you can get these certainly at an art supply store if you'd like one. It's not necessary though. You can also just use your fingers. You just want to make sure that you get it as tightly down as possible. Now, of course, the other way that you could do this, and this may be satisfying to you too, there's something to me about the movement and the ripping that makes me like to do it that way. But clearly I can see sort of how long my pieces need to be. So I can also just rip my masking tape into that size already and kind of stick them on my table and then just use them as the pieces. Now, here's why I don't like that. Because somehow they're always in my way on my table. So a lot of times I bump into them and then they get caught next to each other. So for me, I just kind of like to do it sort of one with the roll at a time. Okay. And then again, I'm just placing it so that it overlaps the previous one, goes down under, okay? And now I'm getting it nice and tight next to that. And I just have a couple more to go. This is only going to have 2 layers, which is a no-no. But I really want to show you how to make the pattern. And at this point, I super need this pattern for this project. And the other thing about it is that not only do I need this pattern for this project, because this one's a little smaller, it's going to be a little bit easier for me to show you how we do it. And I think you'll learn some important and interesting things. Okay, so again, I would do a whole nother layer of the long normally. But for this demo purpose, I can make this work. So I'm just getting this down here and I'm just making sure that whatever I've got nice and tight. Your toe is always a bit problematic here. Okay, so the reason that I also want to show you on this is because normally when you buy a pair of lasts, you will get what are known as last papers. And it is a paper pattern that actually follows very specifically the base of the last. Because I'm always buying shoes, lasts that are used lasts, I never have the last papers. So I also always need to create a last paper. And this is one of the things that is important because when we are sizing up any pattern, this has to do with shoes or garments or accessories. When I need to size up or size down the pattern, I have to proportionally make each piece larger or smaller. So let me just show you what I mean by that. And this is called, in the biz, grading a pattern. So these are some patterns that I already have for a different shoe that I have. And so what I want to show you is you can see that each one of these soles, right, is proportionally larger or smaller than the one next to it, okay? And so there is a way that we grade those patterns up and down, and it is important for us to do so because that means that we get essentially the right size from a wrong sized last. So that's an important thing to consider. Now, I want to get this last paper because I do have to match this shoe to a variety of sizes. So the first thing that I like to do is I like a nice sort of, this is not a super fine point, but it's a fine point black pen, okay? and I like to just draw what I need to do. Now, this is the vamp of the shoe. And one of the serious things to know about a mule is that the higher up the foot your vamp goes, your upper goes, the less likely you will be to walk out of it. Okay, so it is important to understand if my shoe goes up to here, and these stay on pretty well, that's not bad. If my shoe goes up to here, it will be even less likely to come off. If my vamp only goes up to here, it's very likely I will walk out of my shoe. And if it only covers this much of my toe, I will walk right out of it. So one of the keys to my shoes is that I always like to have a fairly high vamp, because that high vamp is what keeps people in it. So I'm going to, as you can see on my measurements from the previous ones, I'm just about just a little over one width of my masking tape down as my marker. So on this particular one, I'm going to actually use that as my guide. Okay, so I'm going to go with my black pen right here. Now, you can see, I hope that I'm right here over where my foot will be. But now I have some choices on the side. I can go from there straight down, or I can angle back. And really, it is your choice what you want to do. For this particular shoe, I am going to angle back. So I'm going to follow the line that I created down to the base. Okay, but now what I have to do is also create that line on the other side. Now what you might notice here is when we look down here, this is an older shoe last. It is made for each foot, and what you can see is that it's asymmetrical from this side to this side. So I think we might have talked about this on the first day, but let me just talk about it for a second here. When you use a quality last, it will have this asymmetry to your foot. As you know, if you look at your own foot, you will see that this is true of your foot. Your foot is not symmetrical. Okay, but many shoes today are made with a symmetrical top, upper. And the reason that they do that is because it's easier and cheaper to make it that way. If I have a shoe upper that matches an asymmetrical foot, I have to cut one for the left and one for the right. If I just take something and put it over so it's equal on both sides, I don't have to do two cuts. So if you think about manufacturing process, cutting a left upper and cutting a right upper are two separate processes. Whereas if I just cut one upper, I just have to do one process. And I only have to set up the machinery once, not twice. So that's one of the reasons that we have gone to creating uppers that are equal on both sides. This is one of the things that leads to uncomfortable, ill-fitting shoes, which leads to a number of problems, because I know I said this in our first episode. If your feet are bad, your whole body's bad. You're out of whack. It's all going downhill. So this is one of the reasons that we have some of the health problems we do today, is because we do not make shoes that really fit your size. Then that's due to mass manufacturing. Okay, so what it means is I actually have to figure out straight across on the bottom where this hits, so I can then get the right line on the other side. So I'm going to go straight across. Now, you could also use a straight edge like this if you wanted to really get it right. You could use a level. I've been doing it for a long time. Shoemaking is a little forgiving, so I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. But the other thing that you might want to do, so I now have a point here and a point here. Now, I don't really want a straight edge there because, as you can see, I have a rounded item. I have one of these. Now, this is a great fashion tool. It's a flexible edge. And it's really, really useful, because what it means I can do is that it means I can line up. Okay, so I'm just bending over the top. And now I'm going to bend down over. Oop, that one's not doing well. Here, let me try it this way instead. We'll go from the side. I'm going to bend it down this way, and I'm going to actually put it on the top so I get a better straight edge. Okay, so I'm bending over my top right now, and I'm going to fix that and make sure that I've got it just right. And then I'm going to take it and I'm going to bring it all the way around, following the mold of my last to my point at the bottom. And again, I'm going to press it in. I'm going to make sure that it's right. I'm going to make sure that I've got the top to the top. And I'm going to make sure that I angle my pen in such a way that I'm getting right on that edge. Okay. So you can see how that rounded, whoop, let me go further down. You can see how that rounded through the edge. And let me maybe put it on my black so you can see it. All right. So now what's happened is I've got a line that is working with the anatomy of my foot. Okay, so the last thing that I want to do with my black pen is I also want to trace my edge here where my bottom of my last fits my side. Okay, so I'm going to just do that. And again, you know, you're giving yourself some visuals here, because the last and you just really want to have visual, because we're going to cut it in a minute, and I just want you to see that it's going to be much easier if I have a visual line to cut on. When we're cutting, we're using often very, very sharp tools. So it's very important for you to be quite careful with your cuts. And I'm going to tell you what I use. So, you know, listen, I think we talked about this earlier too, is that when you learn how to do something, most often what happens is you learn from people who, you know, have been doing it for years and years and years, and they all have a different way of doing it, and they use different tools to do different things. So if you asked me as an artist before I took any shoemaking courses what I would use to do this, I would tell you an X-Acto knife. And an X-Acto knife is perfectly fine, and it's exactly what you could use. When I learned how to do this, my shoe instructor used a scalpel. Okay. So a scalpel is kind of like an X-Acto knife. So I use a scalpel. Very, very, very sharp. Very important that you make sure and be careful that you are working slowly, that you're going away from yourself, that you are taking your time and paying attention. So I have to do this now. So I'm going to take a little time here. And this would be a great time if you have any questions so far to perhaps ask them, view through the chat comments. And then as soon as I'm done with this, I can actually answer a few questions before we move on. Okay, so you can just see me working very carefully, but I do need to watch what I'm doing. So I am very carefully following the line. Again, much like if you have any experience with artwork, when you're cutting things, you don't have to go through on the first try. Okay, you can do a number of tries. And it's usually better to do a small number of tries rather than try to cut through in one big press, because that way you don't risk cutting yourself as much. Okay. So I'm still working at this. It's going to take me a few minutes just to get this done, but I really wanted you to see how it is done, because you know the magic is when these things come off the last. Okay. So I'm going to, and I also choose like how I can situate my last so that I get a nice long line, but without being in the line of fire. Okay. Now, one of the things that you can see maybe now is that as I get through all this masking tape, I can start to pick it up. And you can start to see me pry where I've already cut. Okay? And then I can take my finger and I can move a little further along. Now I need to go back and I need to do some of this, some more of this, because I'm not quite there yet. And you can start to pull up and dig up as you are cutting. Okay, so now I've hit where I've got to go some more. And what's going to happen here is that I'm also, because I'm pulling away, and what you want to do is just be gentle with this. Don't really pull it because you don't want to stretch our masking tape too much. Okay? We don't want to stretch it. We just want to try and gently remove it. You want to, okay, so now I'm coming to another down, so I'm going to shift how I'm approaching that line just for control and also to get myself out of the way. I'm going to tell you a cautionary tale. I've taught design in design schools a lot. It's very important when you are using these sharp tools. One, you want to keep them really nice and sharp, because the sharper they are, the better they work. And to be honest, I probably need to change this blade, but I'm not going to do it right now. The other thing is you need to make sure that you're moving the blade in a direction that you can control and that is not, if it slips, going to hit you. So you can see that I've got the blade here and I'm trying to move it away from me. Okay, now I have to come around this way. Theoretically, I'd want to go that way. It's a little hard to do that. So what I try to do is just move it so that it's not coming towards my body. And you can see how when it's coming around, that's a problem, right? So I have to be quite careful doing it. And the other way to do it is if I can slide my knife under and pull away a little, I can maybe get right under the masking tape and help to release it. Okay. Now again, I need to pull this back a little bit towards me, and I don't like that because it's not a good place to be. So I'm just saying to you, be very careful whenever you're working with any kind of sharp tool. Don't worry too much about your last. It's okay. And we're getting here. I'm getting it out here. Okay. And now I've got to get round my last again. So we're going to play with this a little bit to try and get around there. Okay. And I'm seeing it come. It's not so simple. The other thing you can do is, like, you can see that now my hand is down, so I can really control what's going on with my fingers here. That's another way to try and control it. And I'm getting that up. And again, I will show you as soon as I'm done getting around this tough part. Okay. All right, I'm going to attack it from the other side now. So I'm pulling some of this up so I can just sort of see where I'm at, and you can see where I'm at. You can see what's kind of happening here. And one of the other interesting things is, like, okay, so see, I just did this. All of a sudden, this just gave me another idea for a shoe, for an upper and a style. Now, it would be silly, because this would be on the inside of your foot, to have a fin that comes off on the inside. But what about a fin that comes off the outside? So these are all great things and great times for you to have an opportunity to also visually start to see things a particular way. Okay, so here we go again. I'm coming down the other side now, because I'm going to attack it from a variety of different ways. When it gets too hard in one direction, you can always go to another direction and attack it from that side. You can also see that sometimes I hold my scalpel like a knife, and sometimes I hold it, like a pencil, and sometimes I hold it like a knife. And again, it's all just about getting it in a way that you can control it. Okay, so I've got this one going. Now I have a feeling I might need to do a little more work up here to start to release the upper. Okay, and again, I'm going to go where this is coming a different way away from me, where my scalpel now is moving in a situation where it's moving I'm moving it away from me as I start to lift up the pattern. I have had many a student end up in the emergency room not thinking about and respecting the knife that you are using. So it is one of those things that is super important. I will also tell you a funny story. I learned how to make shoes from several different shoemakers. And one of them, who was the second one that I worked with, had worked with the first one that I worked with and was shocked and appalled that I would use a scalpel. So there you go. He couldn't believe that the first woman I learned from actually thought that that was a good idea, especially with students. So there you go. So I am now working around the outside here again. And this is danger zone because we're going up and around things where I don't have as much control of this knife as I'd like, particularly on this down. So I'm going to take a break for a second. I'm going to make sure that I've really got this at the edge, and I'm going to start to lift up a little. And now you can see I'm lifting up a little here. And I can see where I need to run my knife with the blade a little more to get this edge. And you see I'm pushing away from me with the scalpel, which is not really the smartest thing to do, or it's not really how the scalpel's meant to be used, I should say. It is the smart thing to do because what I'm trying to do is make sure that I'm not coming towards me. So that is another way to think about it. It is another reason to like the scalpel as opposed to a utility knife, because the scalpel has that curve here. So it does allow you to run down as opposed to being very angular and not having that ability. So I guess I see why Rebecca, see, look, you learn something new every day. I hadn't really thought about it until I had to explain it to you. But I guess that's one of the reasons that my first teacher, Rebecca, decided to use it. Okay, now I'm at this very critical juncture, which is this real twist down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to angle this and I'm going to keep my hand down. And I'm going to try and get this edge. And again, this is the hard part because it's around the toe. So I got some. So here we go again. I'm going to go down this edge and see how I'm doing. And, oh, not bad. Okay. So now I'm just starting to pull up. And again, it's very difficult right around this toe area. One of the things to remember is that it's very forgiving. Shoemaking is very forgiving, but you need to be careful even so, because we've got to get around this edge. So now I'm going to start to pull all the way up. Now the reason, you're going to see the reason that we really like to have 3 layers. And again, when you're working with anything sharp, make sure it's out of your way before you start doing the next process. I'm going to actually put it away, but I might need it to finish this process. Okay. Whew, it's coming. Now you will see, maybe you can't, but I didn't catch some of the base layer. So that's why we would want 3 layers of masking tape, because you want to really catch those 3 layers into something that is totally a nice thick piece. Now what I'm going to do is I use corks to put my scalpel in. So now it's totally out of my way. and I'm pulling off, and pulling off. Okay. And so now what you can see is I now have a piece that is a form, just like the form of the shoe. Okay. So what I then love to do, I like to use, these are just plain old folders. They're great. They make what we call a sloper. In the fashion industry, the sloper is the master pattern. Okay. Now you can see that there's a little bit of rounding up here. And so what I can do is I start from the back. Okay. And I start to put my pattern down. And I start to ease it out. Now, as I start to get some alligator here, what we can do is we start to just take your scissors, just clip the edges a tiny bit. So we're just going to clip the edges just a tiny bit. So I'm just clipping, and I'm clipping around just at the edges of the curves, because this is going to allow the edge to expand a little bit so that we can flatten out those curves. Okay. So here we go. I'm going to start to push down. I can see I need a little bit of change here. So if it starts to come back on itself, we're going to cut a little bit here, so we can make it fit and flat. And we're going to push it down. And I'm going to kind of just show you here, even with its foibles. I'm trying to get you nice and flat here. So now you can start to see where the problems are coming in. So I need these guys to go back on themselves, and I need this to open up a little more. So I'm going to do a little bit more cutting, because I need to go a little further in. And I'll now start to see that I now have a relatively flat piece. So I am actually going to cut my sloper out. Now this is just the beginning stage of the pattern. Okay, so we just cut it out right on its edge. But here's what I want to remind you. We just actually did this right to the pattern. We didn't allow for this piece to wrap around and underneath our shoe. So this really is only going to fit to the edges that we created. Okay, so this is not really your beginning pattern. When you have this pattern, you also want to make note of where, and sometimes I prefer to use my Sharpie, I like to just note these elements here where I've had to overlap. Okay. And I like to sort of also, I'll just put the clips. This is a visual for me. So now what I have to do is I have to make something that is larger than this because it needs to wrap underneath. And the other thing that we need to do is we need to have, if we'd like to, if you don't want a raw edge up by your foot, we also need a seam allowance at the top. And that's what we call a seam allowance. And that is what on here you can see. So you see my pencil here that shows the inside plus the outside. So let me show you how I make that. And we will cut that second one. So what I like to do when I make this is a great one especially if you have your lovely bendable. The width of this makes a great seam allowance. So all I really need to do is, first of all, I put this relatively straight, but it's not going to be exactly straight. And I put it right up to the edge of, on the outside, what I've just made as a pattern. And follow it. Then, now I draw the edge of my shoe, my original sloper in here, my original pattern in here, so that I can actually, if I need to pull it up, I can replace it in the right place. Now you always have to remember, this is going to go a little further than the edges. So you want to make sure you have enough space, and you'll see what I mean by that in just a minute. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at that other seam allowance, and I'm going to bend my lovely bendable around the edge, my pattern. And I generally try to do sort of one side at a time because the bendable doesn't always just fit perfectly. So I've got it pretty much up to the side. So here we go with this. And almost around the top. And now I can release that side and concentrate on this side. And get that down here. All righty. So now we have this, which is your central part, and our seam allowance. Okay. So now I cut this out, and this is the one that I start to test with. And this is the one that I will use to start to make sure that I have it right. Now, one of the things that you can see here is as soon as I cut it out, I'll be able to show you. Just a sec. Okay. I want you to see, first of all, what happens. And this is great because you can also, these are inexpensive and you can keep adjusting them. But here's what I want to first show you. When I fold this in half, I want you to see that it's not the same on both sides. I'm sorry, I was a little bit off there, but let me just show you this, that Okay, so here's my center line. And I will use a straight edge just to show you so that you can kind of see it. Here is my center line, and you can see that the pattern is not equal on both sides. So that's really important about having that shoe that is the asymmetric part. You will also notice that this end and this end look different, and the shape down this side looks different than the shape down this side because they are going across different parts of the foot. From here, we've got a really high, steep area that we're going around, and from here we have more of a valley pattern going on over here. Now, the beauty of this is that while this one is for the left foot, if I turn it this way, it's for the right foot. So today, I think what is really important and interesting for you to know is that this is how I make a pattern. And again, what I have here, now what I will cut out after we are over, which will be in a few minutes, what will happen is this will become my last paper once I cut this out. And it will also become my insole for this size shoe. So that's what's really important about it. So again, let's just review and recap that when you are making a pattern for a shoe, it is the pattern for that particular last in that particular size. You start with regular old masking tape. You mask 3 layers. And it would be, if I was making the whole shoe, I would go around the whole shoe. Because I'm only making an upper, I am going to just do the upper part, okay? So I started with masking tape. You always start in the center, and you go from the center of the top of the foot to the toe, and then you start to do that lengthwise stripping all the way down each side. Your second layer goes across. So it goes this way. Now you can go all the way across if you like, but because of the change in your last up here, the mountain that we're climbing, I prefer to do half and then the other half. And it's fine if they overlap. Remember that you're always trying to get the strips to overlap. Our final one will be this one, which is the long one from top to toe. Again, and you're having 3 layers of this, because when we cut, we want to make sure that we maintain the integrity of that masking tape as we pull it off and as we flatten it. Okay, so we want to make sure that it's not going to rip or tear or come apart. Okay, once I have that masking tape, I draw what I want on my upper. And then I proceed to cut along those lines with a sharp tool. It can be a scalpel, it can be an X-Acto knife, it can be a utility knife, it can be whatever sharp tool you want. But remember that you want to use a very sharp blade. You want to keep that blade sharp, and you want to always be controlling the sharp implement and working away from your body. You can gently lift as you are cutting. Then what we do is we put it down onto a file folder and we flatten it. We may have to go back upon ourselves in some areas. We may have to cut a little bit to flatten that 3D shape into 2D. Okay. Once we have this, we then trace it onto another piece of folder. And then we add our seam allowance, which is about 1/4 inch all around. Now this one would be for a seam allowance going at the part that's over your foot. If you don't want this, you can cut straight across here and just use the raw leather, which is what I did in this particular pair. You can see that there's raw leather here. It's not folded over. In a finished shoe, not a slipper, I would definitely finish this edge. So those are two ways to think about it. You can see that we are not symmetrical here, that we've got different shapes on the half size, and that's because we're using a last that's a vintage last that has that. And you will note that we have the left pattern, but when we flip it, we have the right pattern. So you can see that this is how we make a pattern, and we call it a sloper, and we will keep that, and then we will move forward. I will be testing that with some leather to make sure that it fits well, and I'll be moving on from there. So thank you everybody for joining me today. Neil says, aren't the asymmetrics of each foot different and therefore wouldn't necessarily speak to the difference between left and right foot? In the last, they're mirror images, so it will work. So that is, if I cut this out of leather and I put it around this one, and I cut it out of leather and I put it around the right one, they will all work. That is how it works, because Neil, the leather is stretchy, so it stretches and it can accommodate the shift in the asymmetry. So it's been a pleasure to speak with you. We are coming up on our 1 o'clock. I hope you guys have a great week, and I'd like to see you next week so we can move forward with whatever is on my docket for the week. So this week was pattern making. Just to give you a recap, I have an order coming in for couples. So what I am doing is I am making the pattern for my regular slipper last so I can get it to work better, because I had that toe trouble with the bubble when I was using this last in leather as opposed to when I was using it in my stretchy material. I'm glad, Neil, you find that the summaries are helpful, and I hope it helps everybody else as well. Have a great week, and I will see you next Monday. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.